My name is Emily Harper, and I was 33 the Christmas that changed my life forever. People like to say Christmas Eve is filled with warmth, laughter, and forgiveness. In our house it was the night everything finally fell apart. For 8 months, I'd been living in my parents' home after my engagement ended unexpectedly. Losing my relationship meant losing the apartment we shared, so I packed my life into a few boxes and came home. While I worked to get back on my feet, I never expected anyone to carry me. I worked mornings at a bookstore and evenings at a neighborhood cafe, putting every spare dollar into savings. I bought my own groceries, cleaned up after myself, paid for gas whenever I borrowed the family car, and tried to make myself as invisible as possible. I believed I was earning my place. I couldn't have been more mistaken. Around 9 o'clock on Christmas Eve, my mother called me into the kitchen. The moment I stepped inside, I sensed something was wrong. My father sat rigidly at the table, his hands folded in front of him. My younger sister, Lauren, leaned casually against the counter, wearing the smug little smile she'd been hiding behind for weeks. I sat across from my father. "What's going on?" Without answering, he slid a folded sheet of paper toward me. I unfolded it. Someone had carefully listed every expense they claimed I'd caused since moving back home: electricity, water, internet, household supplies. Even the cost of toilet paper had been calculated. At the bottom was a grand total written in thick black ink: $4,386. I stared at the number in disbelief. "I've been buying my own food," I reminded them. "I repaired the broken kitchen plumbing myself. I spent 2 weekends repainting the backyard fence. I drove Mom to every medical appointment while her car was in the repair shop." My father barely looked up. "None of that changes the fact that you've been living off us." His voice was cold. "You've always depended on someone else to rescue you. We're done." My mother stayed silent. She wouldn't even meet my eyes. Lauren calmly filled a glass with water as if we were discussing tomorrow's grocery list instead of my future. I looked from one face to another, waiting for someone to tell me this was some cruel joke. No one did. Instead, my father stood, walked to the hallway closet, and returned carrying a small duffel bag. He placed it beside my chair. I packed the essentials. In it were a few changes of clothes, my phone charger, basic toiletries, and nothing more. "My room is upstairs," I said quietly. "I'll get the rest." I stood. He stepped directly into my path. "You can collect your things after the holidays. Tonight, you're leaving." Outside, snow covered the driveway. The weather report had warned temperatures would fall below freezing before midnight. It was Christmas Eve. I turned toward my mother one last time. She finally spoke. Her words were calm, almost gentle. "You've never really been able to stand on your own, Emily. You always need someone to save you. I think it's time you learned." Something inside me cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to realize the people I'd spent my whole life trying to please had already decided who I was. I picked up the duffel bag without another word. As soon as I stepped outside, the front door slammed shut behind me. A second later, I heard the deadbolt click into place. I sat alone inside my aging sedan with the heater barely working. For nearly an hour, I couldn't bring myself to drive anywhere. Calling friends on Christmas Eve felt impossible. Everyone already had families gathered around fireplaces and dinner tables. I didn't want to become anyone's holiday emergencies. My mother's final words echoed over and over inside my head. "You always need someone to save you." At first they hurt, then the hurt slowly transformed into something steadier: determination. Suddenly I remembered something tucked safely inside my wallet. 3 years earlier, my grandfather, Arthur Harper, had passed away. Before he died, he'd handed me a sealed envelope containing a debit card. Across the front he'd written one sentence in careful handwriting: "Use this only when you've truly reached your lowest point." I had never activated it. I assumed it contained a few $100s. A thoughtful emergency gift from a grandfather, who always believed I'd figure life out eventually. More importantly, opening it had always felt like admitting defeat. That freezing Christmas Eve, with only $23 left in my checking account and nowhere to sleep, I finally admitted to myself that the moment he'd been preparing me for had arrived. The banks wouldn't open until morning. With nowhere else to go, I drove to an all-night diner just off the highway. I ordered the cheapest cup of coffee on the menu, wrapped both hands around the warm mug, and watched the dark winter sky slowly fade toward sunrise. For the first time in months, I wasn't wondering how to earn my family's approval. I was wondering what my life might finally become without it. The next morning, shortly after the bank opened, I walked through the front doors wearing the same clothes I'd slept in. My hair was a mess. My eyes burned from exhaustion. I still hadn't fully processed what had happened the night before. A middle-aged branch manager named Daniel greeted me near the entrance. "Can I help you?" he asked. I pulled the old debit card from my wallet. "My grandfather left me this years ago," I explained. "I've never used it, and honestly, I don't even know what's connected to it." Daniel nodded and took the card. "Let's find out." I followed him to his office area, and waited while he typed information into his computer. At first, everything seemed normal. Then something changed. His fingers stopped moving. His expression froze. For several seconds he simply stared at the screen. When he finally looked back at me, the color had drained from his face. Without saying another word, he stood, pulled a chair away from the nearest desk, and motioned for me to sit down. "Miss Harper," he said quietly, "I think you'd better take a seat." A knot tightened in my stomach. Suddenly I was afraid to look. I lowered myself into the chair while my heart hammered against my ribs. Daniel slowly turned the monitor toward me. The world seemed to move in slow motion. I remember noticing ridiculous details. The overly cheerful Christmas music drifting through the speakers. The ugly beige carpet. The blinking lights on a decorative wreath hanging near the customer service desk. Then I saw the number. I blinked right it again. And then a third time. The account balance showed $486,721.43. For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. There has to be some mistake. Daniel gently shook his head. "No mistake." He explained that my grandfather had opened the account in my name when I was 15 years old. The initial deposit had been substantial. Over the years, additional funds had been added. Investments had grown. Interest had accumulated. The final deposit had been made only weeks before my grandfather's death. Everything had been structured so that I, and only I, would ever have access to it. No joint owners, no secondary beneficiaries, no loopholes. The money belonged solely to me. Then Daniel told me something that changed everything. The account contained a special note attached by the original branch manager. Years earlier, someone had attempted to obtain information about it. That person had been refused. The name recorded in the inquiry log was my father. I felt the room tilt slightly. Suddenly dozens of memories rearranged themselves. My father hadn't known the exact amount. But he'd known something existed. He'd suspected my grandfather had left me more than sentimental keepsakes. At some point he'd gone looking for answers. And when the bank refused him, he'd walked away empty-handed. 7 months earlier, when I'd arrived at my parents' doorstep, after my breakup, they'd welcomed me inside. For months I'd believed they were helping because they cared. Now I wasn't so sure. What if they were waiting, watching, hoping, expecting me to eventually mention the inheritance, expecting me to reveal something, sign something, share something, and when none of that happened? When I quietly worked, paid my way, and kept the card hidden in my wallet, they'd decided it was time to force my hand. The eviction, the list of expenses, the accusations, the carefully packed bag, the timing. For the first time, it all made sense. I spent nearly 2 hours at that bank. Daniel introduced me to one of the financial advisors on staff. Together we reviewed the account history, investment records, tax considerations, and options moving forward. Before I left, I opened a brand new account in my name alone and transferred every dollar. By noon on Christmas Day, I was no longer the woman who had sat shivering in a diner booth with $23 to her name. The first person I called was my best friend, Maya. She had been texting me since the night before. When I finally told her everything, she started crying before I did. Within days, I signed a lease on a small apartment across town. For the first time in years, I didn't have to calculate whether I could afford a security deposit. I paid 6 months in advance. Then I bought a real bed, a couch, kitchen dishes, a coffee maker. Simple things. Normal things. The kind of things that make a place feel like home. On moving day, after the last box had been carried inside, I stood alone in the center of the living room. Sunlight poured through the windows. The apartment was almost empty, and yet it felt fuller than any place I'd lived before, because it was mine. No one could threaten to take it away. No one could lock me out. No one could decide whether I deserved to stay. For the first time in a long while, I felt safe. I never contacted my parents. No angry messages, no dramatic confrontations, no attempts to explain myself. Silence accomplished everything words couldn't. The truth was already obvious. My father had spent years wondering about an account he couldn't access. My mother had watched me be thrown out without protest. Lauren had stood in the kitchen smiling while it happened. The hardest part wasn't accepting what they'd done. The hardest part was finally seeing them clearly. But clarity has its own kind of freedom. My grandfather used to say that people reveal themselves most honestly when they believe they have power over you. At the time, I never fully understood what he meant. Now I did. He had spent nearly 2 decades quietly preparing a safety net he hoped I'd never need. And when the worst night of my life arrived, it was waiting exactly where he left it. Not as a gift of money, but as proof that at least one person had believed in me all along. That Christmas morning changed everything. Not because I became wealthy, but because I finally stopped seeing myself through the eyes of people who never truly valued me. My grandfather had trusted me. In the end, that turned out to be worth far more than the balance printed on any bank statement.